Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope you enjoy that song. That's one of my favorite songs. It's great to share that with you. I hope you can see me and hear me okay and see all of us as well on your screen. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Melis. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the program director at We Create Space. I'm currently based in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, in the Ivory Coast for the English speakers, because we're all speaking English and I forget sometimes. But if you hear any cockerels or very strange bird noises in the background, that comes with the setting. But for anyone who needs a bit of a visual description, I am a Black female presenting person. I have Afro hair. I'm wearing a floral dress, and I'm sitting in what looks like a bird cage, but is actually a chair. So I want, first of all, to thank everybody for joining us. For those who actually are returning into the space, welcome back. For those who are actually new, well, welcome. We see that people are actually using the chat to introduce themselves, so please continue to do that. It's quite encouraging to know that we're all connected. There will also be an opportunity for you to ask questions in the Q&A function, which I hope you can all see. And yes, again, you can also use the chat to raise your thoughts, your ideas, and what comes up for you throughout the session. So a little bit about We Create Space for those who maybe don't know us and it's your first time here. We are a global nonprofit platform and a community and a collective of queer change makers. And we're really on this mission to improve the lives of LGBTQ+ folks around the world. And the way we do this is, well, through content creation, through workshops, consultancy, and sharing a lot of stories and shared experiences. At the moment, we're quite busy but excited, and we've got our Pride events coming up and taking place this summer under the umbrella of Pride and Beyond. And this essentially includes a queer leadership summit next week, actually. And it's a virtual experience with our collective of queer leaders. And it's really designed to help individuals prepare for a very busy season ahead. And we know how challenging that can be. Lastly, this summer we'll be hosting a retreat that's going to be taking place on the 4th to the 6th of July. And this will be held in the UK. And essentially, this is a chance for individuals to, well, just connect, reset, recuperate, and really download some of the amazing information and insights that we've all kind of gathered throughout Pride. So this is a lot of information, but I'm gonna nicely switch on to why we're here today. And this session I've been really excited to share with you, because we will be exploring how leaders can grow their empathetic leadership skills to become more impactful in their role, to become more impactful role models, and really to help foster psychological safety within their organizations, their community, and beyond. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by Ali Hendry, our awesome facilitator for the session, and Denny too, an equally awesome contributing as a guest speaker today. So Ali, Denny, I will pass over to you to introduce yourselves and get us started. Thank you so much and enjoy.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. How wonderful to have people from all over the world. That's the joy of Zoom. There are some joys. So my name's Ali, pronouns she, her. I am a holistic life and relationship coach. I'm also Director of Education Europe at Radiant Coaches Academy. I'm a diversity and inclusion trainer and put together courses on a range of topics, working with a range of different organisations. And as from last week, I was a TEDx speaker. Woo-hoo. Denny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Denny too, pronouns he, him. I was mentioning to Ali earlier, this is my first Zoom in 2 weeks, so I feel like I have to admit that I'm getting back on the Zoom horse, which is so exciting to see everyone on a Zoom. I am Global Chief Marketing Officer at IMAX, and prior to IMAX, I spent 10 years in London. Previously, I was head of marketing at Sky. And so I've got a lot of experience working in diversity and inclusion, building business cases for change management, but also been an openly gay exec for the majority of my career. And this topic is very close to my heart. So I'm really excited to be here with you. And again, just thank you for inviting me to join the session. The last session I did with this group was so transformative for me and so fantastic. So thank you for welcoming me back.
Thank you so much. Thank you. No chickens, but possibly a cat. Yesterday I was on Zoom and my cat brought in a sausage. I didn't have any sausages in the house, so I don't know where the sausage came from. Ground floor, open window, somebody without their lunch. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what empathy is and what empathy isn't. And then I'm going to be asking Denny some questions and then asking you to put together some ideas on how you'd like to move forwards with your empathic leadership journey. You know, we're all change makers in this room, and we strive to build diverse, inclusive work cultures. Does that mean leading with empathy? I say yes, and I think you probably do too, which is why you're here. Let's have a look at the first slide. So I really wanted to start with a quote from Nedra Glover Tawwab. Thank you so much, Maëlys, for being the technical wind beneath my wings and popping up the slides there for me. I can't see the slides. Can anybody see the slides? Do we have slides? It's fine if we don't. I can improvise. No slides here. No, neither here. So just wondering, Maëlys, if we've got the slide deck at all available to us.
Yes, it's coming. 2 seconds.
Thank you so much. It's on a go slow. It's not Friday. I can talk while we're waiting. So this is a slide by a book that I read a fair few months ago now. A lot of my clients come to me for relationship coaching, and this is a book by Nedra Glover Tawwab called Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself. And she's also got a fantastic workbook as well. It's for all relationships, not just romantic relationships, also friendships, family, and the workplace. And she says, assume that people know only what you tell them, honor only what you request, and can't read your mind, which is key, isn't it, really, as we're talking about this, because sometimes we think what we say is received in the spirit of which we have given it, and that's not always the case. I wanted particularly to talk about empathy as part of these Leadership 101 events, because, you know, in terms of minority group status, quite often we can get accused of taking up too much space. And if empathy is about helping us grow psychologically safe spaces, then if we're coming from this place of reductive, you know, take up less space, you're always demanding to be seen, you're always forcing divides, you're always perpetuating us silent majorities, then how can we develop our own expansive mindsets when we're coming from a reductive place? Is this possible? Yes, I believe so. And I wanted to start by thinking about some definitions of what empathy is. Thank you. Thanks, Maëlys. Really appreciate that. Of course, we have to have Dr. Brené Brown up there. She says we should approach people for connection, not validation. She says vulnerability allows connection. I expect a lot of you have seen her work around vulnerability. And I believe that we should approach empathy. We should approach connection with an empathy mindset. And she looks at those two differences there between empathy and sympathy. Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, I'm feeling with you. Sympathy, I'm feeling for you. And I think we should be thinking about areas such as fear and how that sits within this. And that kind of sits well next to trust as well, which is why I wanted to quote Rachel Botsman. I came across her through some work with Brené Brown. They've done a fair amount of work. And I want us to think about how trust fits into growing that empathy mindset. You know, Tarana Burke talks about don't become the thing you fear. And I would add on that we don't have control over others' thoughts and feelings. We only have control over our own thoughts and feelings. And let's look at where that fear to connect might come from. Let's have a look at whether we can embrace that fear, have a conversation with that fear, explore that fear, and then bring trust in, bring trust to sit alongside the fear and see what happens. Let's have a think about that, opening up that curiosity mindset. More on the trust, I was listening to a podcast, Oprah Winfrey's podcast with Brené Brown, and they were talking about trust is choosing to make something important to you and vulnerable to the actions of someone else, which I love. Also, trust is braving connection with someone else. And I believe that what we're talking about here is not just on an individual level. I really do want to state that. I'm sure people listening in, you've already got that, but I just want to overemphasize that, you know, this is about us and others, yes, but it's also us and wider society, you know, because things like the narrative that we held about our national story, for example, doesn't just need updating, it needs rewriting, and that means listening to story. I just wanted to add in another definition around, it's not all going to be definition-tastic, but I think if we all start from an idea of what definitions are and how we frame them, you know, I'd be really interested in how you feel empathy comes up for you. What's your definition of it? And I wanted to add in the definition, lovely definition I heard about compassion, which was from Joan Halifax, who's a Zen Buddhist teacher. She did a TED talk on empathy and compassion, and she talks about empathy being I'm not separate from your suffering, and compassion is empathy without being attached to an outcome. I really like that idea of compassion not being attached to an outcome. So different types of empathy. Let's have a quick whiz through those and see what we think about those. I quite like how Forbes calls empathy vicarious introspection. Vicarious introspection, that's how they call empathy. And they look at three areas. Are you reaching the people you want to reach? Are you predicting the impact of your decisions? Are you nurturing your team and instilling loyalty? And this organization called 6seconds.org, which is an emotional intelligence amalgam of practitioners, they were outlining these three areas here. So we've got cognitive empathy. This is about imagining into a situation, and we can slip into sympathy if we don't move on to step 2 and step 3. Emotive empathy, this is about feeling it, being alongside that person. And empathic action. Now, this is about sitting in silence and not acting. So it's one of those paradoxes. I love the phrase that they come up with, which is don't just do something, stand there. Now, of course, when we demonstrate empathy, that does mean listening to hear, that does mean listening respectfully, and that does mean offering some support because, you know, empathy is not performative allyship. It's not just about a hope for change, it's about doing the change. It's about recognizing if we've got an immunity to change, what's that fear underneath it? And as I said earlier, can we bring trust along and get trust to sit alongside that fear and work out our way forwards? My question for you is, to what extent does your organisation create a supportive and trusting community? What are the ongoing routes and tools that it uses? And how deep is it prepared to go? Okay. I know I'm whizzing through things, but I want to kind of just get it all out there and then we can have lots of lovely chats and discussions. And I wanted to come to you, Denny, if that's okay, and ask you some questions about your experiences. Sure. So, first off, how does empathy show up in your role as a leader? You mentioned, you know, it's been fundamental over the months and years, and perhaps even more recently as well. So how does it show up for you?
Maybe I'll start with some my preconceptions around empathy. And, you know, for a long time, I thought empathy would be a barrier to success in the corporate world. You know, as a young person, you're brought into this world feeling a little bit different. So empathy is a very good skill to figure out who's on your side and who's not on your side. And I think we learn all these skills and you get into a corporate world and those skills seem to be used against you. And so, and we talked about, you know, for everybody on the call, we talked about how real we want to get today, and we're going to get very real, even though it's very early in the morning in Los Angeles. But, you know, I always thought it was going to be a barrier to success. So for me, it's been about sort of using it with great responsibility. You know, leaders aren't necessarily senior corporate leaders. You know, this is a very powerful word. I can speak to what it feels like in a publicly traded company where I'm sitting on the exec as an openly gay executive, where the amount of space I take, Ali, as you mentioned earlier, needs to ebb and flow, because if you don't take space, people will take advantage of it. So, you know, in my role as a leader, I think it just shows up every day. I think I need to be empathetic to myself first, which is really interesting. Empathetic individuals seem to think about others, and I've learned a lot in my career to put my mask on myself. For me, it's sort of like a gas tank. when I give it, it sort of fills me up. And when it's taken improperly, which I hopefully will get into, we will talk about today, it totally depletes it. So, for me, it's about, and I think a lot of corporate leaders now are judged on their EQ, on their ability to create transformational change. And it is an incredibly powerful weapon of choice to blend with corporate skills. And so, we have to be able to take people on the journey. And I think empathy is a really a big part of that. Whether or not that's advocating for programmatic change, empathy can be that personal point of view. As a leader, I sit across a number of intersectionalities. I'm openly gay. I have a disability. When I was in the UK, I was an immigrant. I'm Asian, and so, speaking honestly about my experience helps me as a leader. So I think it shows up every day. And I'm still working on it. I have no answers. I'm 45 this year, and I'm still starting that journey. So I think it's central to being a good leader.
Absolutely. And actually, I wanted to tap into that, the queer intersectional leaders, in terms of your own experience and others who might be listening in as well here today, and how you've formed an approach to it. Because certainly when I think about situations where I felt vulnerable, I have had to learn not to go in defensively, because it never helps. So I've had to learn to recognize what emotional state I'm in and when is the right time. I think that's probably what I would boil down my main learnings. Do I have the resource right now to challenge this? Or is this something that I need to make a statement about and come back to later? Make a statement so that others know that I've clocked it, and then come back to it at a time when I feel safe and able. What have you found for yourself?
So, it's interesting. You had mentioned how to not feel defensive, I think is your words. And I think it's okay to feel defensive. One of the things about empathy that's really interesting for me is our choice of words. And, when we say to someone who's really struggling, I hear you, I'm here, and you make space and time, your choice of words are really important. When you feel defensive and someone comes for you, you have every right to defend yourself. And I feel there is some sort of nicety about being an empathetic person, which is absolutely untrue. And, in the corporate world, or even in personal life, if you're dating, people will take if they have endless boundaries to take. And sort of choice of words has helped me a lot. If in the corporate world, if someone is being aggressive about not understanding the fulsomeness of what a policy will do, the choice of words are powerful tools to say, that's not acceptable. It doesn't sit within code of conduct. I don't feel good about that. And we're not doing that. And so I think the balance of, again, this is for me, I can't speak for everyone. It's been a good middle ground for me, because it allows me to understand my line, and it helps me understand why people see value in what I bring into the room. When it comes to intersectionality, I think one of the things that's really important for anyone who feels a little different is that do not forget that when you walk into a room, you are wearing a rucksack of 25 pounds of rocks. You are walking in with a weight, and that changes your body metabolism over the years from whatever experience you have. And that, for me, the acknowledgement of the rocks has helped me find my way through. I was running sports marketing at Sky as an openly gay leader, and I had individuals say to me, hey, a pitch is a field, and being incredibly condescending. And I wasn't going to shrink. I was going to be very clear about why I deserved to be in that space. So, don't forget that you have a rucksack. Be yourself, draw a line in the sand. And as you grow, that line will change, but never forget you have to be empathetic to yourself first. I think one of the things for me is I've learned that if I can be really clear about how I'm feeling, I can be better there for other people. And if I'm not in a good place for me, I'm not going to be there for other people. So we're going to have to spend some time on me.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. The rucksack image. I love imagery. So I've got some more questions. I want to come back to you in a moment. And I absolutely agree in terms of I love the rucksack idea, and I love the idea of, you know, we look at ourselves first. Let's work on us and where we are at. And I wanted to look at some slides around that. So let's have a look at the empathy underpinnings. Thank you. Thanks for that slide. I think I'm doing them in order. So these are just some of the areas here that can help us look at how we develop those qualities, but also how we might need to shape and train others to develop those, the underpinnings around empathy. And these are things that if you're a leader, you'll be familiar with them, as most, if not all of us here are. Perhaps you've got some coaching experience, perhaps there is some training experience as well. That 80% listening and 20% talking, that listening to hear, how many of us are guilty of listening to speak? Being present is also about using reflective inquiry. It's about using those questions that help us understand, you know, the tell me more, describe to me how that is, you know, what else is going on here, what's underneath that, and being driven by curiosity. A lot of this, I love journaling. I know it sometimes gets a bad rap, a bad press, but how else do we learn about ourselves if we don't take some time out, if we don't have an opportunity to unpick our own thought processes, slow them down, write them down or voice note them, take them for a walk, have a conversation with yourself, go musing. Glennon Doyle, in her book, Carry On Warrior, I love a quote from her: reading is my inhale and writing is my exhale. So, you know, having a think about, why am I committed to empathic leadership? What creates an empathic mindset? What do I think about that? And we'll just pop on the other two slides as well. So this is more about self-knowledge as well. You may be familiar, some of you, with these models here. So the Batari's box, this is essentially emotional intelligence. What's the impact of me on others? My attitude affects my behavior, affects your attitude, affects your behavior. And it's interesting to think about topics like, you know, angry people think the world is full of angry people. What do you think the world is full of? And why is that? So is there some kind of mirror there? You know, if you spot it, you've got it. What do you keep picking up on, and why? What's that telling you about you and how you are currently framing your world? And how's it impacting your behavior? And how's it impacting your attitude? We've got the ability with this slide, you know, to have a think about using our slow brains. So checking those facts, challenging our own perceptions and our own assumptions, and challenging our personal projections when we put on someone else what we think we see or what we want to see. This happens a lot when we fall in love. Engaging with the tension between ideal and actual. I think that's a great journaling prompt. What's the actual and what's the ideal? What's the difference? What are the fears underneath that? Where are they coming from? What can I control? What can't I control? And then just moving on to the last slide there around that kind of self-knowledge and self-development. Some of you, again, may be familiar with learning theory. Where are you on this journey? So those 4 spots there, going from unconscious incompetence all the way through to unconscious competence. I love an idea. I love an analogy. So let's use an analogy with these 4 levels here. When it comes to telling a joke that may belong in the past, let's say, rather than in the present. So if you're in the first area there, unconscious incompetence, you tell the joke and you wonder why nobody's laughing. It's like, this is my best joke. What's wrong with you people? This is hilarious. No joke. Okay, what's your problem? So you tell the joke and there's no laughter and you wonder why. That's your unconscious incompetence. Or is it conscious incompetence? You tell the joke, but you caveat it. I know we're not really supposed to tell these types of jokes now, but I'm going to tell it anyway. It's hilarious. So that's you in conscious incompetence. Or are you in conscious competence? You think about the joke, but you don't tell the joke, because we don't tell those kind of jokes anymore. So you're still thinking about it, but you know that you shouldn't be talking about it or saying it. That's you in conscious competence. Or are you in unconscious competence? What joke we talk about? Don't even know. What that joke is not in my remit. It's not in my sector. I have no idea about that joke. So are we in unconscious competence? It's useful for us to assess where we think we're at, where we think our colleagues are at, and where's your organization as a whole. Quite often the organizations that I work with, they feel like they are between the second and the third. And for a while, they've been between the first and the second. So where do you think your organization is at? And how does this conversation around empathy fit and sit with you and these learnings? Thank you, Melis. Thank you. Okay, so coming back to you, Denny, I wanted to ask a little bit more about where there have been situations where you've had to let's say, re-educate somebody on their own understanding of a situation or their own level of empathy. Is there anything that you wanted to share with us on that?
Sure. I mean, for me, people seem to be more empathetic when they're aware that something they would say to you would be upsetting, right? That's, one of the things that we just talked about. I have an invisible disability, which most people don't know. I'm very proudly 15 years in remission. I had some very strong chemotherapy and radiation, which has made me lose quite a lot of my hearing. And so as a chief marketing officer, I have to hear a lot. I sit with major directors and filmmakers on hearing, and they don't know when I put specialty plugs in or with aids, they don't know. So, I think, first of all, I'm constantly re-educating people around their empathy. People might ask about a spouse and use the wrong gender, and I have to sort of remind them. And that sort of obviously has a knock-on effect on how we'll be connecting. But a big one for me is, this week we're releasing a really big movie with our partners at Marvel called Doctor Strange, which is a really exciting movie. But I worked on a movie called Eternals with Chloe Zhao, and in the movie, we released our first hearing disabled superhero. And again, most people don't know that I might not have my hearing in 10 years. And it's something very personal to me. When I told my husband this, by the way, I said I might lose my hearing. The very first thing he said was, and this is a very good example of empathy, well, learn sign language. And, in a shorthand, he expressed every single fear that I had, and we were just going to get on with it. But, re-educating partners that, 15 million Americans live with a hearing disability, that putting diverse stories on screen isn't a nice to have, it's a must do. And actually being a personal representation of that to our partners at Disney and Marvel makes it mean more. We were able to work with theater owners to put open captioning for the 15 million Americans with a hearing disability. And so empathy also means being a visible example of what change looks like, because it's easy to say no to people in a room when you're not represented, and we're not even talking about representation. And so it's an incredibly powerful thing when you get an open door to talk about it, to help educate what it means. And it also helps people understand. And if you're also working with individuals who have that empathy skill, you can use it to great strength. You can actually pick out individuals who are like you, like a superhero, and spend your time and energy there, and then see what you can create if you're working in that protected space. So for me, it's an everyday thing, and I kind of have my antennas up, and I spend a lot of time with people who I think have that skill.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'd like to invite people to pop their comments into the chat in terms of what have you done. Let's celebrate you. Let's celebrate your brags, your situations where you have challenged someone, or you've seen something that actually there was a empathy bypass and you were able to get them back on track. A couple of weeks ago, I went to a comedy night, and it was essentially a queer comedy night, and the compere was using a lot of discriminatory comments around non-binary folks, and so I was able to re-educate her as a result of that. So it takes it takes tuning in and it takes action. And I think one of the things that we can do is we can say, well, I feel empathy, I'm empathic, I'm interested, I do my own research, but I'm really interested in the actions that follow out of that. I was also recently comparing an event, and I asked them about the lineup, and the lineup was not diverse enough as far as I was concerned in terms of BIPOC performance. So I went back to them and suggested some performers and said, this has to happen. This is not where things need to be. So, being proactive, making sure that you are tuning into that diversity. And as you say, having that opportunity to bring people together and learn from each other, which is fundamental.
Hey, Ali, I was going to bring up, there is a great power to transform, because empathy can be a tool to create transformation. And one great example that I like to share, I don't remember what we call them in the UK, but in the US, there's something called the curb cut effect. I don't know if you've heard of this. But a curb cut is there are, if you're walking on the street, you can see that little indent down. And the curb cut effect, and you talk about empathy, curb cut was originally designed to make public streets accessible to wheelchair users. I think it was started in Michigan in 1945 to help disabled World War II veterans. So a really good example of empathy in terms of accessibility. But what most people don't know is because of that, today everyone benefits, whether or not you have a physical disability, if you've ever pushed a stroller, if you've carried heavy bags, if you had groceries delivered, if you have Amazon coming, you had joint pain. The history of curb cuts teaches us, I think, that empathy can lead to change, and that technology and change and empathy can be good for everyone. And I think there's an assumption that empathy is some sort of left for people who want to do good, or the do-gooders versus the change agents. And I think the curb cut effect is a really good example of something that we all benefit from, that we all, we wouldn't have got through COVID if that act in 1945 didn't change the accessibility for more than just the individuals walking up and down streets.
Yeah, thank you. We call them drop curbs, and similar story around that as well, actually, and using that, well, the business case to diversity, something that's been around as a discussion for years and years, but actually taking it further into the empathic realm. I really like that idea. I've worked with businesses and we've talked about the expense of bringing in voice recognition equipment, and then realizing who else is this going to benefit, and individuals who have repetitive strain injury starting to access it as well. So broadening that benefit, I think, is a great way for us to move forwards in this. In terms of everydays, you mentioned, empathy is in you every day. There are those opportunities, there are those situations that arise. Do you think we should make it a practice? And if so, how can we create that as a move to, call to action for all of us?
Yeah, I think it, everyone that made time to be on the session today is making it part of your practice. So you've done the first step. I do want to say that empathy for me is like being a sponge, and it can, again, be used for good. I work with a lot of young leaders. And one of the things that's very painful for me to see is during COVID, you're seeing all these examples of everyone who's used the time to launch a new business. I've learned to make sourdough bread. I'm now 30 under 30, Instagram and all these other things. And it's exhausting. So I think we also have to start with the fact that we're tired, and it's okay. It's okay to be tired, and it's okay to see all of this, quote, greatness that's being presented in the digital world, and to feel bad. Because again, if you're an empathetic person, you want to be present. You want to celebrate the individual. Forbes 30 under 30 was announced today. So you're seeing a lot of great people and you feel for them, but the natural impact on you could be, am I doing enough? And so I do think it's really important, as we talk about sort of mindfulness, to say that, it's okay to be tired. It's okay to feel like I have achieved some really nice things in my life, and I still never feel like it's enough. And you never feel like you are doing enough. And that's why being empathetic to yourself, which is something I don't think we talk about. I think we talk about how we present and how we interact as humans. but we don't talk about what you need before you go to an event. You know, Ali, I know you mentioned earlier you went to an event in person for the first time in a while, and that's very stressful. So we're thinking about how we want to be good people and ask interesting questions. You know, one of the best bits of advice I was given in really stressful networking events is to be interested and interesting. And it's a balance of listening, but also speak up. And, you know, to take care of oneself is, I think, the most enduring message out of COVID. And we have to also recognize that COVID was and is an experience of sacrifice. It was sacrificing. I don't get to see my gran. I don't get to hug a friend who might be ill, so I don't want to pass anything to them. I do not get to do this. It was 2 years of sacrifice, and that sacrifice has cut into people who feel. And we need to make sure that we top ourselves up again. So I sort of want to do that speech because I think it's an important part of being fulsome and using that as a daily practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Topping ourselves up. That's such a good reminder. Let's have that last slide. Thank you, Malis. And then we will start thinking about reading out some of the responses in the chat, because I've seen lots of wonderful things come through. So this is from Thich Nhat Hanh. Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. And, you know, we're having conversations, we're having discussions, and I wanted to read a couple more quotes. Matt Haig, who has been through a lot recently and in the past, talks about where talk exists, so does hope. And anyone who is familiar with the book, The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk, language gives us the power to change ourselves and others by communicating our experiences, helping us to define what we know and finding a common sense of meaning. So, you know, listening through each other's stories, which I'm really interested in. That's why TED Talks are so valuable. No, lovely. Thank you very much. So let's have a read of some. There's been some great things in the chat there. This is an opportunity for some Q&A as well. What has been your everyday demonstration of empathic? Leading as an empathic leader. You know, let's have some examples. So if you want to put into the chat, what's your everyday demonstration of empathic leadership? You want to pop that in. We would love to hear from you and learn from each other. We've got a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to learn from each other here. So what's your everyday demonstration of empathic leading? You know, we're talking about how we continue to ensure that our staff feel seen and supported. But as we're talking about here, crucially has been highlighted, as Denny's been saying, you know, how we support ourselves. We have these backpacks, these rucksacks that we're carrying, and we have to be mindful of that and make sure that we are in a good space, because it continues to be a challenge for all of us. Anything else you wanted to add in, Denny, before I hand back to the team?
Actually, Ali, we've got a question that came through in the chat. Maybe both of you can have a look at it and I'll read it out.
Oh, lovely.
It says, being that leadership in the UK is only 8% female and almost no queer women in that 8%, how does a woman with an MBA at leadership level with a deep compassion and empathy for the right companies to apply to? So is there anybody inside those companies that can respond to us? I have been at 2 Pride Summits and not one interview coming out of either of those events. So again, a question about representation, but you know, women with empathy, queer women, anything that maybe you can share into that.
Yeah, sorry, Denny, you've unmuted.
Go
for it.
Ali. No, please go first, Ali.
It's really interesting. One of the organisations that I do a lot of work for, they've got 12% of women in their workforce, and I'm really interested in behaviour, and I notice different types of behaviours when there is, and also they've got sort of 5 to 6% ethnic BIPOC community as well. And it's interesting. Look, hey, all we can do is control our own behaviors, right? And I know this isn't answering your question directly, but I think it's really interesting to look at how do we show up in those situations when we are in that minority? Because what I see when I'm running these training sessions is there's the, if you can't beat them, join them mentality. There's the, I have to be better than everybody else. I have to overprove. I cannot fail, and this is really stressful. Or there's the, I have to go around and educate everybody and I'm absolutely tired and exhausted. And of course, then there's the ones that are almost negating their own experiences because the organization has not allowed them space to have their own experiences. So I guess for me, I would come at it from a point of view of mindset, because I'm a coach, rather than being able to offer any practical advice on that. Denny, anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I can maybe tackle the practical side. If there are no visible queer leaders in an organization, then that might not be a place you want to go. I think that's one. Two, we need to be very good advocates for each other because the system won't be. And, I talk about the rucksack thing, the deals for C-suite jobs happen in the south of France between a certain type of person, and we're excluded from those conversations. And somehow to network is a bad word. I have a lot of people reach out directly to me because in my profile, I state very many things about my background. And I'm very happy to connect individuals with a network that would absolutely love you as a new team member. And so, being from the outside, I think being ruthless about what you want and what you need is a good thing. If that is where you want to be, go for it. If you see an individual, reach out. You can reach out to me. We're happy to have a conversation with you and maybe connect you to some people. But I think it's really important. I want to hit two things, Ali. I didn't pretty much say in the last answer. You'd mentioned how can we do it in the everyday. I've got two bits of practical advice. Number one is powerful one-to-ones. I think a powerful one-to-one to me is whether or not it's with your boss or someone who works with you or somebody at your level or someone you're having an issue with, using the time to state where your bubble is. You were talking about shrinking down a little bit and then kind of maybe drawing the line out a bit more. Powerful one-to-ones and setting it up so you're in control. You can be empathetic, but you can be in control. That's a great tool. That's number one. And number two is, I call it peacocking. By the way, I live on a street in Los Angeles that has a peacock. There's a peacock walking around named Percy, which I love. He is pretty amazing. But I call it peacocking. When you're an empathetic individual, sometimes you might be perceived as listening a lot, which means you seem quiet. Okay, so if you go to the 80-20 rule that you mentioned earlier in the slide, you seem quiet. Peacocking for me is when I'm in a board meeting, I'm loud. I'm sort of annoying. I'm honest. And I use the contrast between what people see every day in the other locations to peacock a bit. And then you kind of throw people because they're not totally clear on who you are, because you're so quiet and thoughtful. Yet when you're on a sort of a big stage, you sort of come alive. And I think many of us come alive when we feel safe. So like Percy, the peacock who's walking down the street right now, I think choose your moments to peacock and enjoy.
I love that. Be more Percy when appropriate. Love that. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? We see you. And thank you for your question there. I see you. I see you. I see your skills. And I've seen that there's some other people that are reaching out to you as well, which is just wonderful and phenomenal to have this community space.
Ali, there's this maybe question for the both of you as well, as seeing the spaces in which you work. So how do you continue in your work to ensure that your staff and colleagues and managers will continue to feel seen and supported?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's building on what Denny said earlier in terms of that regular communication. The training organisation that I've worked with freelance for over 20 years, we get a lot of work from organisations where there's no communication, where that's broken down, where they just expect it to be magically known what people are saying and doing, and it certainly kept us, it keeps us in work. So a lot of that is going to have to be, what are the routines that you have within your organisation? What is regular, and are they meaningful? Don't make them a tick box, make them a meaningful meeting. Denny, what would you like to add?
I think, hybrid working, return to work, personal and emotional safety are big parts of the reintroduction of individuals back into work. And so empathy can be a very powerful tool when someone is saying we have to be back in the office 5 days a week. Empathy can be a tool to help understand how we retain our most powerful staff, and giving a point of view that that C-suite executives don't see. When we travel safely, we travel in private cars. That's not true for every single member of staff. People are living with lower living wage. Is a difficult time with childcare and the complexity of the human condition that has affected people in a multitude of ways over the last 2 years. And we don't see all the sides, whether or not they are a caretaker or they're having anxiety issues returning to work. It does not make us a weaker corporation by being aware of how to create an environment. And this is kind of my point earlier around the line. If we do not hold the line, if individuals in positions of authority and influence do not hold the line moves. And empathy can be a tool to say, this is good for business. When I was writing, programmatic changes at Sky, so a very large 33,000 person organization, we don't do pride because it's a nice thing to do. We do it because it's good for business. Don't conflate the two. And I think it's really important that the line we choose as empathetic humans is as strong as the stuff that's coming at us every single day. And I think the tools that you shared in the slides are incredibly insightful. And I think, hopefully folks on the call today can see how they can apply it. But find your line, hold your line, and use your skills to make you feel comfortable holding the line, because we shouldn't shrink.
Absolutely, 100%. I agree. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anything else you've got for us, Maylis?
Actually, yes, this one that just came through here. And you were both talking about, Denny, you closed on here about pride and the fact that, yes, there is a lot coming up for people. And even as we move into this month, we've got Mental Health Awareness Month here in the UK. We're going to go straight into Pride season. Often folks have talked to us about, that kind of compassion fatigue, or even just the excess of empathy that has to be shown by them, not only leaning into their identity and being seen, but also, that kind of line where leaders or other folks within the organization come to them because they are the only queer individuals in the space and they seem to have the answer. So again, you talked about boundaries, but I'm wondering, in terms of self-care and how you navigate pride yourself, this piece about empathy being something that you lean in for yourself, like what are the things that you do to look after yourself? How do you find your no? Ali, same question to you as well.
Yeah, using those resources, because I still find it, I still go into organisations up and down the country, admittedly on Zoom at the moment, and the diversity and inclusion expert is always usually, not always, usually a visible minority who, and this was happening 20 years ago, we've got one of those, so they must be interested in diversity and inclusion. Brilliant, bring it on. And you've got some person going, okay. And you have to learn fast. So part of what I see that works really well are some of these multifaceted staff groups where you have the ability to have, you have the opportunity to connect within your own protected characteristic or protected characteristics, and also have meetings where you invite others in. So you have an environment where you can have that psychological safety, you can talk, you can rant, you can feel, you can emote. And you also have situations where you might have similar conversations, but it's for a wider audience, and you tailor accordingly, because sometimes this phrase "don't scare the horses" is used a fair amount, and sometimes we do have to take a softer approach. I go back to what Denny's been reminding us all, and that is the self-care. What's your resource? Who do you go to? Who's your, who are your people? Where is your support? Is that a practitioner? Is that friends? Is that family? What resources do you access? Is that yoga? Is that mindfulness, spirituality? Where does that fit for you? And how can you be focusing on that for you? Because you're important. You're really important. Denny, what are you thinking?
When I'm doing well, I feel very present. And when I'm not doing well, meaning I'm not, spending time on putting the mask on myself, I describe it as spinning. Sort of, that's the word I use. And it means that we can overthink things. We can go, what if? We can spend time questioning our motives, our everything about us. And so for me, that's the spinning thing. And when I'm spinning, I spend very active time being very clear about what I need to be fulsome. And empathy is an incredible skill for me. If you're on this call, you, I think, have a gravitational pull to the conversation that we're having. And there are individuals in my life that I absolutely know a 15-minute phone call, I just feel bright as day. There are things that I can put in my day that I know that will help me just a little bit more. But I go back to the line. It's been a very important tool for me, because people will move your line, and before you realize it, the line is past you and you've got nothing left, and you're trying to be present for others and you're not being present for yourself. And I think it's a really important thing. And don't apologize for yourself. Don't apologize for the things you need. Don't apologize for wanting a safe, inclusive work environment. You do not need to. You are righteously deserved it, and the leaders in your organization need to provide it. If they don't, they'll be replaced. That is what's coming. And find places that you feel good in, and decide where your line is. I feel like I'm on an 8:58 a.m. rant on a line. So hopefully, that and Percy peacocking down the street, hopefully those are good visuals for me to leave.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
It's our right to be happy. It is our right to be happy in the workplace. Let's go get it.
Thank you both. That was beautiful. Last question before we wrap up. And it's someone who says, I work in a leadership position in a rapidly expanding startup, and I'd like to have the company engage more with the LGBTQ plus community. As a member myself, currently, the environment generally seems positive, but I'd like to push forward towards being more openly supportive. Any advice on this before we close?
Denny, what are you thinking? I think for me, it would be from the point of view of what do they need to hear that gets their buy-in? But in terms of some more sort of kind of, so that's mindset again. What would you say, Denny?
Just looking at the question from James, first of all, I'm happy to speak to your leadership. I think part of it is getting leaders from other organizations that have maybe progressed. Every organization is on a different journey. So it's very powerful to bring in best practices from other organizations and have people speak to it. If you are too small to have a formal DE&I program, or you don't have ERGs at the scale that you need to have, you don't have to. When companies are building things, they tend to do it because they feel like it looks good, and they're not doing it because they have to. And brand affinity is how a company behaves when no one is looking. And we need to find companies, that will behave in a good way. So I'm very happy to speak to your leadership. So please drop me a line and we can do that. I think advocates from outside of organizations can create change. Inside, sometimes it's too much overthinking. And so if you want to push forward towards a more openly supportive agenda, drop me a line. I'll help you. Simple as that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denny. Thank you so much, Ali. It's been incredible to be in this space, and I really love the energy and how you really both invited people to share and celebrate their wins, how they approach empathy, and really share some of their concerns. So I hope this space was really valuable to everybody else as it was for me. This is it. We're on time. We're wrapping up. I shared links in there for people who want to be in touch if they want to, but for us at We Create Space, we'll be back in a couple of months. Speaking of empathy, we're taking care of ourselves. And really throughout Pride period, we won't be hosting any queer leadership and queer perspectives. However, we're busy programming more events, more conversations, more power, more energy in these spaces. So thank you all for taking part, and we hope to see you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.